always been something I'm dealing with, and it can impact my work in a sense that my brain can switch off. If my blood sugar is too low, I can faint, like I said. If my blood sugar is too high, sometimes I can't get up in the morning. Sometimes my physical ability is just so impaired because my body is so exhausted. So there's small ways that it affects how I can work, and it's, again, really, really generally hidden, even including the sight that I do and don't have. So just one of those things that I think over the years I've had to choose who to speak to about it when it's relevant. Sometimes I can do a perfectly good job and no one ever knows. I can work with them for years even, and people don't know, but sometimes it's very essential too. And that's why I'm excited to be here and sort of open the forum for these sorts of disabilities.
And thank you so much for that. If we can pass over to Hannah.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah. I am an intern at Intent Health, which is a healthcare communications startup. This is my first job, so I'm a bit unique in that I don't really have any kind of experience prior to the pandemic. All my experience so far has been completely virtual, so I guess a bit out of the ordinary. I have ADHD. I've got the inattentive type. I was diagnosed about 2 years now. Having the inattentive type basically means that I have more of the attention deficit part rather than the hyperactivity part, and that my hyperactivity is more likely to be mental rather than like physical. So in that case, not very obvious. I won't be bouncing my leg as often or like bouncing off the walls. I'm also hard of hearing. I have a thing called high frequency hearing loss, which basically came from me having too many middle ear infections as a child. And it's not an issue with volume necessarily, but with consonants that generally use higher frequencies. So my problem is that I do understand that something's being said, I just don't usually understand what is being said. I can't distinguish between words as well. But I do want to focus on my ADHD here because my experience being hard of hearing isn't really representative, and it doesn't really impair me as much as my ADHD, other than the fact that I require subtitles for most things. But yeah, I'm obviously ADHD affects your work patterns, your productivity and stuff like that. But there's like tons of guides out there that talk about how to accommodate a coworker or an employee who has ADHD in terms of organization and productivity. So I kind of wanted to talk about the things that I've been struggling with and things that I haven't really found resources on the internet for. And that would be 1, emotional dysregulation, and 2, medication, as well as obviously the differences of working from home versus the office and what I hope we can bring from the working from home part that works into the office. So emotional dysregulation, which is what I really want to talk about, is just basically the fact that ADHD affects much more than our attention span or the fact that we can't sit still. It's, as it in the name, we just can't regulate our emotions. It basically makes us hypersensitive, which in the workplace I've found has made it really hard to maintain or start collegial relationships, to be able to judge the distance properly, and to also maintain a bit of a professional distance to the job itself. I feel a lot of stuff that might go wrong or like minor inconveniences that people would brush off, for me linger for days or weeks, and I can't really have that separation between work and like, free time in life. So I've had trouble with that. I'm also super conscious about playing into certain stereotypes of women being over emotional and that kind of stuff. So it's been a fine line to walk between being aware of my emotional dysregulation, voicing it, and trying to find ways of working around it, and also being aware that I'm also always playing into larger stereotypes and kind of representing all women, or playing into the stereotypes. So I tend to overcorrect a little bit. So I've been struggling with, I know that I have a tendency to sometimes interrupt. So I tend to overcorrect and not participate at all, which obviously goes in the opposite direction. Doesn't let me say my piece and doesn't let me like be as insistent as I can sometimes be. What I have found has worked, luckily, is my line manager has been great about these kind of things and has kind of instituted anonymous feedback. So every once in a while, periodically, she'll go to my coworkers, my managers, basically ask them for anonymous feedback, and it helps me being anonymous. It gives me the sense that people will actually speak their mind, and it kind of gives me the good gauge that I don't have personally, of how I'm doing. And then the second thing I'd want to talk about is medication. I feel like a lot of people have the idea that ADHD, because there is a medication for it, like the one pill, that people just assume, oh, you take the pill once a day and it, turns you into a normal functioning human that, works the same as everyone else. And that just hasn't been true. Obviously, medication affects all of us differently. But for me, it makes me work better in some aspects. So it makes me better at some parts of my job. So sustaining focus and stuff. But it makes me worse at other parts of my job. So I'm not myself when I'm on the pill. I can pay attention better, but I'm also not entirely myself, which makes it hard to field Zoom calls or client-facing work when I fundamentally don't feel myself, when I'm under the influence of something. And so it kind of makes it hard to sometimes plan my day around when to take the pill and when not to. And I guess it's hard to convey this idea to your coworkers when they think that, oh, you have ADHD, but it's medicated, so it should be fine. So yeah. Also, I just want to mention that anything that we do talk about today, Eyula and I have kind of compiled into a little PDF of resources, like a how-to ADHD guide. I don't know if anybody else here on the call has ADHD or some kind of neurodivergence, but we will put it in the chat later. And I think it'll be in the follow-up email, just so it's all in one place. I know it can be really hard to like take notes and remember stuff from a talk. Yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Hannah. I'll pass over now to Ahmed, who's based in my favorite city in the world, Edinburgh. So go ahead.
Thank you, Michael. So yes, I have something very similar to Hannah, actually, which is the deafness part of it. And I am moderate to severely deaf and have been all my life. And I'm wearing hearing aids right now under my headphones. So it's very, very hidden. I can get away with it. I'm very good at lying and pretending everything's fine, which I've been doing my entire career. It's something that I've been hiding my entire time because I used to think that it will put me in a bad light in terms of the success of the role in an interview or during the job. And that has always affected me. You have to hide it, and mentally very exhausting. And it's only really the past 3-4 years I've started to be more open about it. And I do that a lot via my website and YouTube on hearingmeoutcc.com. And that's where I've started to really talk about deaf awareness and personal challenges, because it's not just about the deafness side and not just about the obvious things like the communication barriers when you are in a noisy environment or in an office, but there are other things that people don't think about, like you get exhausted from just the physical action of listening is very tiring. You get the thing called concentration fatigue. So it's quite interesting during the entire time in the pandemic, people talk about Zoom fatigue, which I find quite funny because it's a thing that has been there all my life. I call it life, really. It's not Zoom fatigue. So it's quite interesting that that has been talked about more. So I have found that I try to get around it in my own ways. But in my own career, whether it's in an office or working for myself or at home or anywhere, I have to adapt in various ways. And I can talk about that, obviously, during this webinar. But it's something that I hope to, over time, just be more vocal about it and be more open about it, because it's really not that scary. People get scared about it and they just want to run away, but it's not that bad. And it's not something that none of us really want people to have sympathy about. It's just about empathy, really, over sympathy. And that's where I hope that all of the discussion that we're having, people will have that more awareness and just how to adapt to certain people, like we always do when we talk to anyone. That's me.
Thank you for that. And I think for me, I really resonate a lot with the hiding part. For my own experience, if it's interviews, if this is any public speaking, and for so long, it's like, you know that it exists, but you just rather go over it. And that has really weighed me down, like on a quite an extreme level, often at really important stages of my career. And so I really resonate on that front. And then it's only really the last few months where I'm like, I'm going to actually openly face the issue, although it's scary as hell, to be quite honest. But that's what I'm trying to do. So I'll pass it over now to Eyula. Please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Eyula, and I'm currently a communications intern at Intern Health, and I'll soon be a junior account executive. So I'm in health communications to help those feel undervalued. To help those who feel undervalued feel valued. To help those who feel underappreciated feel appreciated. I have a background of digital marketing and content marketing, as I love making content that makes people smile or make people think. I have the sickle cell trait, and I'm currently in the process of getting an ADHD diagnosis. So with sickle cell disease is a blood disorder that is typically inherited from a person's parents. It leads to red blood cells losing oxygen, which changes the shape of the blood cell to a sickled shape. Due to its size, these cells can stick together and they can block small blood vessels and the movement of healthy, normal oxygen-carrying blood, and this blockage can cause pain. When I work, there are times that I feel very, very fatigued because one of the symptoms of having the sickle cell trait is chronic fatigue. Coupled up with painful episodes, I could be fine one day and then completely not fine the next, not even days. Sometimes I'm within doing a task and then just all of a sudden I'll have that episode. I'm very thankful to have a supportive team, but for a very long time, it was very hard to open up about something that people can't see. So like to even Claire's point, like if I was walking down like Oxford Street or something, people wouldn't know I would have sickle cell trait or anything towards sickle cell disease because it's such an invisible disease. And I'm here today because I hope someone who has sickle cell sees this and they feel empowered to speak to their employer about sickle cell and the effect it has on their work. I also hope employers see this and create an environment where employees who have sickle cell feel comfortable to speak up.
Thank you for that. I'll just go back to you on that front. What was the conversation like for you when you first spoke to your employer or perhaps a colleague about it, and how did they respond?
So it actually came because I was so stubborn and I didn't disclose it very early on. And it came because I had a cancer scare around December / January, because there is a cancer that is out there that is only linked towards those who have the sickle cell trait. And I was having a lot of painful episodes. And it got to a point where it was literally something as small as writing meeting notes that I just had a breakdown, and I called my boss and I was crying and I was just like, I can't do this. This is what's been happening. And she was just so thankful that I came to her, and she just told me, well, one thing that she told me that I'll never forget is there is a certain amount of quality of work that you put out and that everybody sees, and they will hold you to that standard if you don't speak up, which led me to have some debriefs with the colleagues that I work with the most. So there's one account on the Intent Health team that I will speak to them nearly like 5 days of the week. So we have calls to speak to each other about the way that I approach work. Obviously coupled up with ADHD, the chronic fatigue, and my getting started problem with starting with tasks can also be very, very challenging. But what really pushed me to actually open up and speak about both the sickle cell trait and how ADHD affects my work is the fact that with my colleagues, they would want to see me shine. They would want to see the work shine, Intent Health. And at the end of the day, I would want them to understand me, and so they can feel that they could be patient with me, because if someone doesn't understand who you are and how you approach things, it's going to be very hard for them to even muster up the patience to be able to be like, okay, I know she's doing this. I know how she does this. This is why this is happening.
And for you, Hannah, because you also work with Hannah, Eyula, and is your experience, especially because you mentioned in your intro about how you often sort of overcorrect. Is that something that after speaking with your own colleagues that they can almost try to help you to not overcorrect, just and make your own performance and your own experience just not as intense?
Yeah, it can be hard to try and verbalize and externalize like what's going on in my head while we're on Zoom calls and stuff. But we are really lucky in the sense that intent health is very different from what I mean, it's my first job out of uni, but it seems to be very different from, you know, the usual workplace in the sense that everybody is very inclusive and not just by name, just being like, oh, we're so inclusive. They actually do the groundwork. So there will be times in the meeting where a lot of people are talking at once, and over Zoom, that's obviously just a cacophony. And many of our managers will take the time to be like, oh, and Hannah, you know, is anybody else, you know, any more kind of thing, like, Hannah, did you want to say something? Or we're generally very good at being like, if somebody talks at the same time as another person and then steps back to go back to that person, which has been really helpful and has helped a lot. But of course, it's the thing about emotional dysregulation is you can tell me you don't hate me as much as you like, but as soon as there's something happens where I interrupt or something, you know, I'll be like, oh my God, you know, it'll just,
Yeah,
there's no learning curve. Unfortunately, there's just repetitive again and again and again.
Yeah, and to add to Hannah's point as well. So before this job at Intern Health, I used to work at a agency that did digital marketing, and within this place, it was like they obviously didn't know that I had ADHD. I didn't know I had ADHD then. And there'll be times where I would blurt out things, and there'll be times when I would interrupt. And I can see the significant difference of having a supportive work culture that is Intent Health compared to that role. And because they know of ADHD and they know of the symptoms, they're able to understand that. But there are times when I can come off as I don't want to say the word pushy, but if I sometimes blurt something out, or as Hannah said, overcorrect, then if I'm saying it towards my seniors, there may be a senior that come back and says, I don't think that's the way that you should be speaking to a senior. But I had no rude intention whatsoever. It's just the way that my brain works, unfortunately. But when it comes to those times or those events, you just have like that open and honest dialogue, and you say to them, this is not my intention. I understand this is the impact. This is the cause, and I'm not trying to invalidate your feelings whatsoever, because your feelings are valid, and thank you for coming to tell me. And having that dialogue has really helped me navigate me blurting out and me overcorrecting.
Yeah, I think that communication and that consistent ongoing communication is just really, really important. I'll just pass over to you, Lela. As working at Forbes, I'd imagine you are working with a lot of colleagues who are based all around the world. How has those conversations worked for you at Forbes, both with the leadership, but also with your fellow contributors at Forbes?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, again, like being in a digital workplace now, as we all are, it's almost impossible to have those conversations. I think perhaps even more so than normal. So, for example, when I worked at the Telegraph, I was in office 5 days a week, but it could mean something like a low blood sugar in the morning. What this looked like for me is becoming desperately weak, my brain slowing down to such a degree I can't function properly, I can't understand things, sweating, desperately needing sugar, basically. My pancreas doesn't work, doesn't create that for me. But that can mean I wake up an hour later than I'm supposed to if I have one overnight or in the morning. So the hindrance to getting to work even can be so massive. And I think previously to the last couple of years, I would have just panicked, called in sick, done something at home, been like, oh, it's a sick day. But I think over the years I've understood I actually have to discuss with my managers, I'm having a bad diabetic episode. This is what's happening. I can work from home. That's, again, one of the great things about the sort of digital workplace. But it was really easy to lean on hiding it for so many years because having those conversations felt so difficult. It was so easy to feel othered by saying I have a problem that other people don't have. So I think weirdly working from home means it actually impacts my work much less. I'm able to deal with those situations, work from home because it's so normal. But it means those conversations do come up less often because to the watcher, to any boss, to any colleague, I'm doing a great amount of work, hitting everything that's supposed to be there, but I'm having a lot of private struggles. So it's really difficult still today to introduce that perhaps I've had a bad day, or, you know, I had a really high blood sugar after lunch and that set me off for like a couple hours. So then I'll work extra hours in the evening to make that up. I always still feel like having those discussions with people feels unnecessary. There's a little bit of sort of anxiety about them, though there shouldn't be. And I think that's why having these conversations is so important, because we should all feel very, very comfortable discussing any challenges we're going through with our workplace and with the people who obviously want us to be at our best. But yeah, it's just a different workspace, really, of all things. So it has great pros, like those mornings where I wake up really low or really high. It's invisible to them because it doesn't change my work, but it means I talk about it much less.
Yeah. And how can we avoid that extreme situation where you only ultimately tell your employer because you're at the breaking point or just in a really bad place? How can a workplace or just yourself personally avoid that point? Because I feel like at the moment the common thread often is that because I was at the final straw, and it'd be good if we can avoid that part.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the best thing personally has been having a boss or just any sort of level of management that will open that discussion before it needs to be there. So I feel like every job I've ever had says, you know, do you have disabilities when you join? And I've always said no, because I'm just like, I don't want to start the conversation. And particularly in the hiring process or something like that, again, I don't want it to count against me. So if you're in your interview stage, if your boss explains that you have a workplace culture that wants to look after you, whatever your disability might be, and support you, that's also going to be not only a great way to get a more diverse pool of talent, but keep them there and really encourage them to stick around. And then when you're in there, having those conversations, because I think, as we can see by the people on this call, there are so many hidden disabilities and such a far range. There are probably tons of people in our workplaces that we don't know have plenty of issues. And if there was any space, whether that's simply a social space, even where 1 hour a month people could come and discuss their challenges, it just opens a door that needs to be opened for those people.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll pass over to you, Claire, because your experience is going to be quite different because you're returning to work. What are your conversations, if you've had any conversations in returning to work, not only with a senior management, but also just with colleagues? Have you had those conversations yet, or what's your experience right now as we stand?
Yeah, well, I have had those conversations, and I think my biggest fear has been played out. So one of my fears about returning to work is reliability, is how reliable am I going to feel when I'm sat at a desk when I haven't been sitting for a long time? Am I going to be letting my teams down if I have a day when I feel fatigued? Am I going to be letting clients down? And I think that fear on reliability has shown itself because I've already had to delay my start date. due to the pandemic. So because gyms and during the lockdown, everything was closed, my mobility and my health deteriorated. So I need to maintain quite a strict exercise and physio regime to keep my muscles working. I lose them very quickly if I don't do that. And this last lockdown has been pretty bad for me for that. So I think in January I had a conversation with work about returning in March, and then we get to March and I definitely wasn't ready to go back to work in terms of my ability and how healthy my body felt. So already I feel like I've had that taste of reliability issues by saying, actually, I still need another few months before I'm going to be ready to come back to work. So my employer was fantastic. Just said, absolutely, whatever you need, your health comes first. I think I'm probably in a different situation from some of the others in that I've been with my company for about 7 years. They know me very well. I was in right at the beginning. It was a startup at the time. So it is a very open workplace for me. I found those conversations very easy to have. I think it's my own fears that have, kind of holding me back a little bit with that. But I think something else that struck me, listening to everyone else speak today, is just the mental load that we're all carrying. So whether that's, putting in place coping mechanisms, or whether that's hiding our disabilities, or in my case, it's actually the mental load of trying to accept what has been a completely life-changing event for me. So I think to put that into perspective, in the last 2 years, so since this injury, I think I've spoken to about 8 different psychologists or psychotherapists to help me come to terms with what my new life looks like, and also uncertainty in the future. But also for my family as well. So my daughter was only 3 when this happened, and in her eyes, I just didn't come home after having a baby. So she lost me for 4 months, as well as gaining a brother, which was very difficult for her. So I think that the mental load that we're under shouldn't be underestimated. And I think that's also important if we think about the pandemic and the effect of the pandemic on a lot of people's mental health. I'm sure, we're not the only ones, who've had a different experience during the pandemic. And I think to everyone's point, it's a time to really listen to our colleagues and really ask those questions. How are you feeling? And to give people the time to respond. So I think, everybody needs to be supported to find their voice, and not fear the consequences of using their voice. And that is all in the supportive environment and this workplace that champions compassion, and being kind and really listening to each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. Just really candid. So thank you. I'll just pass over you to Ahmed. Just be really curious to hear, what was the turning point? Was there a moment for you that made you be more open and to openly face your own challenges? Because you mentioned that how for a long time you just sort of try to not bring it to attention in interviews or anything like that. Has there been a turning point, and what spurred that?
There's been a few. One of them was as soppy and romantic as it is, meeting my wife, and that had allowed me to be more comfortable with myself. And at that time as well, I was also doing my own work, my own freelancing, and I was doing this video, which was encouraged to talk about letting go of whatever it is that is holding you back. And I decided to, open up, get out of a closet, if you like, and just let go of this thing that I, throughout my life, thought it was holding me back in social, professional, whatever it is. And basically, I did that by doing a 3-minute video, stick it on YouTube, and just get it out there. And that was like a release for me. Over time, I created more content, I opened up more, and I found that it actually helped a lot of people. And the videos and podcasts and blog posts, whatever I've done, the fact that it helped other people, it also helped me. And I found it very therapeutic. And it also made everyone feel less alone, because I didn't really have that environment around me. And I thought I was the only one, which is not true. There's millions around the world. But it felt like a lonely place to be. So when I started to just be more out there and talk about it, I got a lot of people reaching out to me, and they open up their soul to me, and that was really nice, because then it made me realize that we have similar challenges and problems, and we can deal with it together. That then made me feel like, you know what, I should be more open about it whenever I work with anyone, whenever I'm in an office or co-working or working at home. It just made me realize that it's better to be open and honest about it, and to show your true self. And I see it like when you go on a date. If that person don't like you for who you are, then that person's not right for you and doesn't deserve you. And I see it the same way as, if you have to hide yourself, then you're not showing your true self, and that person is not really wanting you as a whole. It's wanting that fake part of you. And it took me a long time to realize that. It just made me feel like I deserve to be with someone who just wants me for me, like you do when you go on a date. And that's how I thought about it. And the more I did that, the more I felt comfortable with myself. And the more comfortable with myself, then I was able to deliver my best work, whoever I work with. Because if you have a good working environment, anywhere that is, then you're more likely to deliver the best work possible. So there's no doubt that being open has helped me out a lot. I just wish I've done it many years ago, but never too late to do that.
Yeah, I do feel like, although my own experience is completely different in many ways, but I feel like I do resonate with you a fair bit, because I so often go into, especially meetings or with people of real senior level, and I've got a contribution that I want to say, and it's in my head. I'm like, God, this is going to be great. Like, this is going to be terrific. And then it comes out, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, like, this is not good. And my confidence just goes. And for me, it's always mentally, you internalize it, and you just want to escape the room and just not be there anymore. And that's a repetitive theme. And for me, it came to a front. One time I was getting spokesperson training for a previous employer. And the issue of my speech impediment was never brought up at all until literally as I was about to walk into the room for the training. My manager goes, "Are you sure you want to do this today?" I said, "Oh, why not?" And I said, "Oh, because I know you got a stutter." And I was setting myself up for that day of like, I'm going to go in there full of enthusiasm, being positive, and that just killed me. And the rest of the day, it was an utter disaster. I would have been very embarrassed watching myself go through that entire day. And I think it's about understanding how to speak to people, if it's obvious, if it's not. But just about like again, the communication. It does come back to that, and that's that's a tough thing, because everyone goes through their own little challenges and their own experiences. So it doesn't make me any more or less of a person or anything like that. But the internalizing part, I like to sort of hit myself internally a lot. But I just want to get back to what employers are doing well right now, considering the bigger picture, especially as we go into more of a hybrid working. But perhaps I can go with that to Intern Health duo. If you guys want to share about your own their own experiences there, what tangible things are you guys doing that makes your life easier and more beneficial?
I think I resonated a lot with Ahmed's idea of like the workplace only wanting your fake self if you don't really disclose properly. And I think what made Intent Health different, I'd been struggling to get work because I was trying to, press myself into ways of applying that just didn't work for me. And Intent Health was different in the sense that they didn't really ask for a cover letter. They wanted us to answer 3 questions. Why diversity was important to us, et cetera, et cetera. And it just felt very natural, and it felt like they really meant what they said when they wanted people from a wide range of places to apply. And I felt comfortable being my whole self and disclosing right away that I had ADHD, because it would inform the work that I did for this healthcare communications agency. And the way that they conducted the interviews, the way that they conducted the whole hiring process has really been an example of what they've done. Like, they've followed through the entire thing. I mean, it goes so far as that Jane, our CEO, and my line manager, who's helped me do this, anonymous feedback routine, she was the one who actually went out and got help for us once she realized that a significant amount of us happened to be neurodivergent. She found Access to Work, which is a government scheme basically that you can apply to even if you haven't been diagnosed yet. And they give you loads of access. They give you one-on-one coaching. They do awareness trainings. So she really went out of her way to make things easy for us. And I think what sets Intent Health apart is the willingness to learn, to be compassionate and to learn, and to be flexible with what you've learned, and flexible with what you expect of people. I mean, we all do great work, but it's because we do it in our individual ways. So for example, I have adjusted hours. ADHD brains don't usually work on the same circadian rhythm as everyone else. We tend to be either, night owls or really early risers. So I work from 7:30 to 4:30 instead of from 9 to 6. And it was, the adjustment period for everyone was about like 2-3 days, and everybody just got used to it. It also makes it easier for me because I've got then like 2 hours, a chunk in the morning where I know I won't be distracted by emails or anything like that. So that's one of the things next to the feedback rounds that we've like tangibly done to make things easier for me. But yeah.
And then to add to that, I think one of the first things that Intent Health did that I was just like so taken aback by was with the interview stage. Like, one of our colleagues told us that he had been found through a portal that directly is for disabled or neurodivergent people to find work. I believe it's called Even Break. And then not only from taking people from those unexpected places, but continuing that momentum of making sure that the work culture is a comfortable place to be in. So one thing that Jane did is that I believe in December, so just a few days of like us being within the company, she set up a workshop, the disability awareness workshop with Elizabeth Wright. She also told us the importance of making sure that these disabled representatives are paid and treated fairly throughout their time that they are making us aware. Because like, I really liked how she broke down the fact that when it comes to explaining disabilities and trying to understand each other, there are some of people who are disabled that don't feel like doing that, but then there are some people who do that for a living, and she was telling us like the importance of making sure that they are compensated and that they feel valued. And with that, that was the first thing that made me feel like I could open up to her about sickle cell and the sickle cell trait. So when it came to opening up, it was definitely down to my own insecurities. So even what you were saying, Michael, first of all, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And it's like, when you disclose you have a disability, it can be like a double-edged sword, because it's like, at one point they do understand that there'll be some times where you're not at your best, but then when you're at your best and you're ready to go and you want to do certain things, and they may stop you, and then they're just like, are you sure you want to do this? Or maybe you should take this part instead, or this task, and you know in your heart that you can do it. And it's very frustrating, because there'll be times where you would want to speak up and be like, actually, I know I can do this, and I'm glad that I have. But for some people, that can just get them even further down the rabbit hole and increase their insecurities. So I think what Intent Health does really well is understand the flexibility of my capacity. They understand that I may feel amazing one day. I can write a piece of medical racism, I can lead a pro bono client, I can do all these things, but then another day I'll feel completely incompetent, and it's because of my chronic fatigue. But they also understand that with these days, even though they switch up, I'm still a person that I can be relied on. I'm someone that will make sure that the work that I put out will be of good quality and that they see that. So apart from the disability workshops, they've also encouraged us to go and read resources to understand our colleagues better, because it's not just ADHD that is in the team, there's also dyspraxia. So when it came to finding access to work and finding organizations like Genius Within, when you go on Genius Within the website, it also gives you insight into these conditions or disabilities. And it was very helpful for Jane to point us in that direction. Like, no matter the hierarchy, everybody should be able to understand the disabilities in our team, because I believe it's in intern health, it's 50% invisible and visible disabilities. So if you're creating that kind of work environment, everybody who even doesn't have a disability should understand how the different employees will approach work and how they should receive feedback. And with the debriefs and the line manager meetings, for example, with my line manager, due to my ADHD, it can be very hard to keep on listening within conversations and not like doze out. And it can be very rude to some people. And I do disclaimers and things like that. But when it comes to meeting notes, if I'm writing up contact reports, there can be times when it's very hard to write notes that are actually reflective and comprehensive of the meeting. So what my line manager suggested is that I go on to Otter AI. It's a transcription service where you submit the Zoom recording of a meeting and then it transcribes for you. And it does it really, really well, actually. And then when it comes to the free version, it will subscribe up to 40 minutes of each recording. And that really helped me write comprehensive meeting notes and gave me the confidence to be like, I know these notes are comprehensive. I know that they're going to be something to look back on in the future, and be good insights for campaigns that we make. And just having that confidence just propelled me within the work that I do every single day.
That's really helpful insight. Thanks for sharing that. If I just go back, and it's up to who would like to tackle this, but with Ahmed, Lela, and Claire in particular, as we sort of move hopefully out of the pandemic and we adopt like a bit of work from home, also going to the office a bit, how is your experience going to change, and what are your concerns going forward for yourself?
I can share that. I've been working from home for 5 years anyway, so before the pandemic happened, and I just found that it gives you another angle to look toward in terms of just customizing your working environment. Obviously, before that, in an office, you have options in terms of people trying to be as accommodating as possible to make your working environment possible. But I think that now that there's this another venue that we can look at, avenue even, that we can look at, then it just adds another level, I think, of customization. And the way I do that is one thing that I like to do in my home environment. I just try to customize it as much as I can that suits me. And sometimes I find that it's not always possible to do that in an office. An example would be, I just want to make sure that I have the right kit in terms of technology, software, but even like headphones I use or microphones, stuff like that. And then you can add on top of it what everyone's talking about in terms of getting up in the morning and how easy or hard that is for some people, depending on how you feel. Having that option there means that you can use that if you want to. And I just find that I benefit a lot from customizing my working environment as much as I can. And I still tweak it. I still keep tweaking it even more and more. And because I can do that, I feel like I can deliver my work as best as I can. Whereas there were times in the past in an office, I said, for example, I would like a good quality headphones so I can do my calls, and that's hard enough as it is. And it turned out to be the cheapest that they can find, the very low quality, and it just didn't work for me. You can't customize that. There was a lack of understanding from what I need, but because I know what I want, I felt like, okay, I'm just gonna take matters into my own hands. So this hybrid thing that we're talking about, I just think that it's a positive thing, especially what Lela mentioned about waking up in the morning and you just have that low energy because of disability. That happens to a lot of people. But if you have an extra half an hour, let's just say, to recover, instead of using that to rush to get the bus, then you're going to be at your best as you can be by the time it's 9 o'clock, for example, and you're ready to go to work.
Yeah, and that's really helpful sort of insight on that. We've got quite a few questions that are coming through the chat box. So what I'm just going to do is, the first question from Emma Hughes, a really good question. I'm going to pass over to Lela, who can expand on that. If you want to go forward, Lela.
Sure. So this was a question about basically disclosure and the fact that I had said that in future jobs, I basically never said to anyone that I was disabled in some way. And I think it's really difficult, sort of like Eyula was saying, it's a double-edged sword. So I've worked in media for a decade, and the understanding now is so different from even 2 years ago, I feel. So early on, as a journalist specifically, you're really expected to, as a local reporter, go out to drive places and get stories, but obviously being blind, I can't drive. So there were very obvious initial hurdles to doing those sort of things at the start. And I think that just encouraged a sort of unfortunate anxiety about my condition, not only the blindness, but the diabetes, because it can hinder how I present. And that is so essential in media, as we all know. So I think moving forward, I would always disclose, but I still think there's a lot of work to be done in organizations themselves, just encouraging a culture where people feel accepted and comfortable, because the go-to for people who especially gone through lifelong disabilities like myself is to keep it under wraps until it's important to share. And that's not at all what I would advocate, but it's definitely the world I've grown up in. And it's really unfortunate. But I think also having, if you are in a workplace where the culture maybe doesn't lend itself towards being super open and super honest about these sorts of things, finding people who you can confide in. So in places where it's been more difficult for myself, I've had a great line manager who I can speak to. I've had a best friend who has had their own hidden disability, very strong, deep clinical anxiety, and we've been each other's people to lean on in those situations. So finding what works for you, especially if you live in or you work in a difficult workspace, I think is really essential, because I don't think we're quite there yet where everyone's going to jump, like Michael was saying, they full disclosure, but still not speaking about his disability with him in the right way. So do what you can that is right for you. And hopefully we'll move with more conversations like this in a space where we can all be much more open.
And to follow up on that, we've got 2 more questions just around when you should tell your employer, if that's during the interview process, and also one from Iti as well, just in regards to should you share it with just your line manager or with all your colleagues. Claire, about someone who is on a senior level type position, would you, is there something that you would very outgoingly encourage with your colleagues about, like, being comfortable and knowing that they've got the real proper support, not just the, oh, don't worry, you're fine, but the culture.
Yeah, and I think this comes back to what people feel comfortable with doing, but absolutely I would recommend that we do have those open and honest conversations right from the beginning, if you feel comfortable doing that. I think from my perspective, I think I would from now on, and that's because this isn't something that's been a lifelong thing for me. I'm coming back to work in a very different capacity from how I left. So I feel like I owe it to my employers to explain why certain things have changed. For example, I'm going to have to be based much more from home than I was initially. there are obviously pros and cons to that. But I think absolutely, even if you don't disclose that you have a disability, absolutely a good employer would always provide you with the support that you would need, you know, in any conversation if you're struggling with any particular task. I'm so encouraged to hear everything that's been put in place by Intense Health. It sounds fantastic, so much support there. And I think there's a lot that other agencies and other businesses can learn from that approach, and from, you know, not just paying lip service to being an agency that champions diversity and inclusion, but Hannah, to your point, really following through with that. I think there's a lot that we can all learn. So I think it is, you know, finding, and again, to Leila's point, I agree, finding those people that you feel like you can confide in and you can have those big conversations with.
And especially, I think this whole conversation is really relevant, especially to people who are entering in the industry, because there is a reputation for some agencies to not have the best working culture. To you, Hannah and Eyula, if you had your time again with sending in your CVs, would you feel comfortable of trusting who you're telling this information to, of knowing that like you are going to be, like, your best interests are going to be protected? Is that something that you would, like, openly now going forward continue to do?
Definitely. I think it's a bit of a privileged position to be in, a bit of a high horse, and I might not follow through, obviously, if I do ever look for another job, or when. But I think I would go openly into it, being very open, the fact that I have ADHD, that I have certain needs and require certain support, simply because if the workplace isn't willing to accommodate that, then that's not a workplace I'm willing to work at, you know. And I recognize that that is privileged and that we don't always have the choice necessarily, but I would definitely start with that premise, to be open and unapologetic. I mean, the fact that I was diagnosed 2 years ago was a huge relief to me. Like, I've never, and I think I'm a bit somewhat unique in that, but I think the younger generation in particular doesn't feel as much shame around our diagnoses as maybe a generation before us, or even 5 years ahead of us. I'm not ashamed of my ADHD, and I wouldn't want it to be an issue in my workplace. If it is an issue for a potential employer, then they're not the employer for me.
With me, when it comes to interviewing, there are so many things that I have to keep in mind. There is the ADHD, there is the sickle cell trait, there's even being Black. And with Intent Health, they already had this premise of being anti-racist and being anti-ableist, and they said this like very clearly all through that out their website. So I knew that there was a level of comfort there. However, when it comes to employment in general, I am worried that when it comes to my time to leave, that when I decide to go elsewhere, there won't be workplaces that are like Intent Health, and I completely understand that. So what I would say to that question is, when I'm in the interview, I'll ask the questions that make me understand like their work culture, that'll make me understand how they take care of their disabled employees, invisible and visible. Because I think that when it comes to interviews, a lot of people forget that you are also interviewing them, and you are also trying to understand how they can accommodate your needs, especially if you have a disability. And that is so, so key for you to actually feel comfortable where you are and not feel any type of resentment towards your job, towards your manager, towards the day-to-day things that you do, especially within healthcare. Like, healthcare is such an amazing industry because there's so many different things that's happening, like any other industry, but it's like you wouldn't want to resent that type of work that's changing people's lives. So you would want to be in a place that not only is changing people's lives externally, but is also making your life easier and accommodates to the things that you need. So simply put, towards those people who don't have that type of employer that me and Hannah have, it's good to have like those conversations. And if you don't feel comfortable with those conversations, then you should also try and research not only your rights, not only like the legalities of it, but I dare say even sometimes thinking about moving towards another employment. But I do say that from a very privileged place, because there'll be people that feel that they just got this job and they're just like, you know what, I'm going to stay here because it's so hard to find a job right now in this pandemic, which is why when you are going in at that interview stage, like I was saying before, make sure you ask those questions to make sure that you're comfortable. Oh, Michael, you're on mute.
I am, yes. Thank you for that. No, I was just going to say that, you know, I think being open, I think it's always a challenge to allow yourself to be open and to speak up. But I think if we've learned anything over this pandemic is that the power of voice from internally, and the culture is very much needs to be set from leadership. And if the leaders are being open and are openly talking about their own struggles, then it encourages everyone else to. And I know that we are at the PRCA continuing to look at ways that we can help encourage that culture more across the industry. But I just want to say thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We could keep on talking forever really about this, because it's such an important topic. But I just like to say thank you very much to our 5 terrific speakers. You all added great value today, so thank you so much, and I really appreciate the additional questions. If anyone did have some questions specifically for any of our speakers, please do get in touch with me. I'll be sending out an email shortly with some resources as well that you're welcome to have a look at. But thank you so much. This will be up on YouTube as well in the coming few days, so I will share that around. But a big thanks to everyone.